What's up? Welcome back to Unplayable. Mike here, and I wanted to talk about some off-meta decks. So the Spark of Rebellion meta is coming to a close. Store showdowns are wrapping up. People are getting real excited about Shadows of the Galaxy. So I figured what better time to talk about some weird decks, some fun decks, some decks that I think you'll have a good time playing until the next set comes out. So we're going to talk about 3 of them today. I've been playing these for a while. I've been having a ton of fun with them, and I hope you will too. So let's check out the first one. All right, so the first deck I want to talk about is Leia Blue. And maybe is not a color combination of Leia that you've seen before, but this Leia Blue deck is a deck that I've had a lot of fun with. I've played it a lot, played a bunch of different versions of it. This is sort of where I'm at right now. And yeah, it's really fun. It catches people off guard. It plays very mid-range. You can go super aggro or a bit more controlled depending on what your draw is and depending on what your opponent is playing. So let's just go through the cards here, take a little bit of a closer look. So I am playing the Security Complex in this deck, but I think you could probably also play the 30 health base and be just fine. I was trying this originally with Alliance Dispatcher in it and using the Security Complex to sort of, pretend to be Luke for a turn. And that was okay, but it felt like too often the Alliance Dispatcher was kind of a trap. And so I took that out of the deck entirely. And Security Complex is still good, especially with stuff like Dodonna. It's pretty good on Dodonna, actually. And Vigilant Honor Guard's really good on that to maintain the Sentinel for a little bit longer. So let's just take a look at the units here. We've got pretty standard suite of 2-cost or turn 1 plays. We've got 2 R2s, 3 Restored Arcs. We've got the 3 Battlefield Marines, 1 Mon Mothma, 2 Alliance X-Wings, and 1 C-3PO. So the ones that you want to see obviously are Battlefield Marine or maybe Restored Arc. The X-Wings are in there because I felt like I wasn't drawing enough decent turn 1 plays in this deck a lot of the time, and it just felt kind of awkward. Alliance X-Wing's not great, but it's still, pretty good paired with something like Wing Leader or Fleet Lieutenant, or, just allows you to get that head start that you need with Leia. And yeah, I guess I should talk about as well, like why Leia, why this color combination just broadly. And I guess it's, you can use her ability a bit more defensively in this deck than I think other decks use her ability. So rather than attacking into a base twice, thing that I like to do a lot is attack into 2 different units and use your units as removal and as a way to control the board, which is pretty effective. Once you get into the later stages of the game, that becomes really crazy when you're, like using Leia's ability and attacking with a Luke and a home 1, or play U-Wing and then you threaten to next turn hit your opponent's base for 8 with the 2 Echo-based defenders. So I think that concept of attacking multiple times for your benefit, whether that's either attacking your opponent's base or attacking their units and then still maintaining initiative, makes it a pretty potent deck. And a lot of people aren't prepared for it. So yeah, diving in a little bit deeper, we've got R2 and C-3PO. I've got a couple more in the sideboard. That is mostly against control decks. And, her ability allows you to attack with both in one action and draw the card, which can be really nice. They also get buffed by Dodonna. They get buffed by Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader. So they're not just card draw engines, they have other utility as well. Then moving on to the 3-cost cards, we've got, no surprise, we've got Fleet Lieutenant, Wing Leader. Every single unit in this deck is a rebel, and so those, help out a lot because they're either allowing you to go faster in the turn, trade up, or, in Wing Leader's case, that's really great to Wing Leader your leader, who's Leia. She becomes a 4/8 that attacks for 5, which is pretty strong. And then Echo-based Defender, which is maybe not the best 3-drop in the world. Having 3 health is a little bit rough. It gets traded into by a lot of 2-cost units, but the idea with this deck is you have initiative, so you're making the trades. You're hopefully trading up into what your opponent played with that, or pulling it off of a U-Wing reinforcement later on to either stall the game or threaten to do a bunch of damage on the following turn. So yeah, next up, we're going to talk about the 4-cost cards. We've got Kanan, and we've got Bright Hope, and we got Dodonna. I don't think we need to talk too much about Bright Hope. You've seen it in a million decks. It's a great card. Kanan is a rebel. It's a 4/5. Putting a shield on Kanan is really nice as well. Helps you heal, helps you stabilize against aggro decks. and gets buffed by all the rebel synergies here. And then Dodonna just buffs all the units in your deck, makes them good. Also, as I mentioned, good with the shield from Security Complex, and it can allow you to make trades that you wouldn't have been able to make otherwise, or allows you to push your board advantage if you're the aggro deck in the matchup. Moving on, we've got only one 5-cost unit in the deck. We've got Vigilant Honor Guards, which is maybe, I don't know, one of the weaker units in the deck, I would say, but it can catch people off guard. It can be hard to deal with, especially if you put a shield on it. And it can be played the same turn as Leia. So you oftentimes want to play that to protect Leia, then flip Leia, and then, use your leader without having to worry about your opponent attacking into her. So moving on, we've got the 6 costs. We've got Rogue Squadron Skirmisher. I've just got 2 of these in the deck just to fill the curve out a little bit. This is a deck where you kind of want to be just playing on curve until the later stages of the game, and then you can do some more fun things with like U-wing reinforcement or playing multiple units per turn. Maybe if you're in the controlling kind of matchup and you've got R2 and 3PO out and you're drawing a bunch of cards, you can focus more on going wider than curving out. But a lot of the times I feel like this deck just kind of curves out and then sort of just uses its like board advantage and speed to its advantage there. Yeah, so Rogue Squadron Skirmisher, it's just like a decent unit. It's not my favorite unit in the world, but it is a rebel, so it gets buffed by all your other rebel stuff. If you have Dodonna out, it's a 5/7, which is pretty sweet. And ambush is something usually lives, and then on your next turn, you can attack with Leia, attack with this, and potentially take out 2 things or hit your opponent's base for a bunch of damage. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll move on to the big stuff. So we've got 3 Lukes, 3 U-wing reinforcement, and then 2 home ones in the main deck. Luke is nuts. That's basically the reason why this is a deck. He's a rebel. You get to use Leia's ability with him, and sometimes you can attack for like 13 with home 1 and Luke out, which is really sweet. Nothing feels better than using Leia's ability and hitting your opponent for 13. That's definitely super fun. And then restoring 5 at the same time, because Luke's got restore 3, home 1's got restore 2. But yeah, obviously not too much to say about Luke other than that he is incredibly good, and that this is a deck that makes use of him really well. U-wing reinforcement is ubiquitous in Green Hero, can help you find your Lukes, can help you flood the board, can help you set up sentinels, can help you clear your opponent's units with something like Akbar, help you get card advantage with R2 and 3PO or Mon Mothma. So insane card, incredible in this deck. It is probably the best card. And then home 1, just more top end, more recursion, more threats, and restore. So I think home 1 is really, really, really strong in a lot of matchups. In the aggro matchup, it's a little slow. So, you maybe think about taking that out for some other of the sideboard cards, but it is quite good. Talking about the events, we've got not that many here. We've got a couple Rebel Assaults because card allows you to do a bunch of different things. You can either use it to trade up into some of your opponent's units, which can be really helpful and necessary. And obviously you can use it to push damage to your opponent's base and put pressure on. Quite good. So we've also got 2 copies of Takedown, which can be used to take out some of your opponent's problematic units. It's just a versatile, easy, cheap removal card that can hit the things that you need to hit a lot of the time. And then we already talked about U-wing reinforcement, but that is pretty much it for the events in the main deck. And then we've got 1 upgrade, which is 1 copy of Devotion, which is just a good card. I like the buff. I think it is really good against Sabine and against other aggro decks that don't really have answers to upgrades, or, not often. Just throwing a Devotion on a restored Arc 170 and turning it into a Restore 3 unit. 3/4 Restore 3 is kind of nuts and can, win you a lot of games. So let's move on to talk about the sideboard. We've got another copy of Rebel Assault for the matchups where you might want that. We got another R2 and another 3PO, and then 2 more Devotion. So, Devotion probably is a card that I bring both of those in against the aggro matchups. R2 and 3PO, I'd probably bring those 2 in against control. And then we got Make an Opening, which is great against the shielded units that Boba Fett plays. I found that this deck is pretty weak against Boba Fett generally, unless you curve out perfectly, hit that Luke to kill their fire spray, and yeah, sometimes you can do it, but their flip turn is so big, you don't have a lot of ways to stop it, and it's rough. That's one of the reasons why I added the Alliance X-Wing in, actually, is because you really want to go into space, and it feels a little harder in this deck to make that work than in some other decks. Then we've got 2 Redemption, and we've got the last home 1. So Redemption is a weird one. I don't actually like the card that much, but it is a big space unit. I think it's better into like the mid-range and control matchups and the aggro matchup, even though it heals you for a bunch. But you're probably dead by then if you can get this out. And there is other healing in the deck with, you know, Devotion, the Restored Arcs, Kanan, Luke, Home One. I mean, you're probably taking Home One out in the aggro matchup, but there are other ways to heal. I don't know if you like really need the redemption heal. I also think that like this deck inherently is like pretty decent against aggro, just generally, given what it does. So I think Redemption is more there to just be a big space unit that's hard for your opponent to deal with, that you can threaten to deal 6 with it, plus whatever you have on board with Leia the following turn, than for the heal itself. So probably a card that I put in against Boba because it blocks Fire Spray. That's pretty much that. So I'm a big fan of this deck. I think there's a bunch of different ways to build it. I had a version with the Alliance Dispatchers, like I said, and you know, the goal was like turn 1 Alliance Dispatcher, turn 2 either Bright Hope or Escort Skiff off of the Alliance Dispatcher, and it was kind of fun. Like went off a couple times, but it was ultimately not as consistent. And I like where I've ended up with this deck at the moment. If anybody tries this out, definitely let me know what you think about it. And yeah, let's just move on to the next deck that we're going to talk about. Whoa. All right. So we've got a green Sabine deck, Sabine ECL, but this is not the Sabine ECL that you're used to. This is Ramp Sabine ECL. So we've got a bunch of big cards here. We got Ewing Reinforcement, we got Mace Windu, we got Home One, we got Reinforcement Walker. And I'm going to tell you why. So the genesis of this deck was basically when the set first came out, I was messing with Green Sabine, and it was very much not the version that other people were messing with, because I was really interested in the fact that Resupply allows you to play Sabine or deploy Sabine on turn 2. And I just thought that was kind of fun. So turned this deck concept into what it is, partially because of that, and then partially because I wanted to try and win a store showdown with Mace Windu in my deck. And ultimately I didn't actually end up doing that, but I do think this deck is kind of sweet and catches people off guard and makes people play really weird. So just high level concept of the deck is you want to try as hard as possible to resupply on turn 2 and then play big stuff. So you can resupply on turn 2, and then the next turn you can play Steadfast Battalion or Zeb, and you can ECL those into your opponent's stuff and like really control the board. Obviously you can play towards the late game because you have so many late game cards. A lot of times your opponent is going to mulligan completely wrong against you, assuming that you're just the standard green Sabine deck, and they're going to look at you really funny when you start trading with their units, and they're going to make some weird decisions, and it's ultimately going to result in you winning that game. So this deck is very cool. Let's dive in, take it one card at a time. So for turn 1 plays, we've got 2 R2s, we've got 3 Battlefield Marines, we got a Mon Mothma, we got 3 Green Squadron, A-Wings, and 3 Sabines. So fairly standard, I think, for Green Sabine here, other than the Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma, I actually don't really like that card very much, but I think it can help in the later game matchups, the control matchups, and help you find the cards that you need. Like you can find Home Ones, you can find K2, you can find Zeb. Like there is utility there, but it's not a card that I'm very excited to play on turn 1. I'd rather like pull this off of a Ewing Reinforcement if I need to. And yeah, not my favorite. Like maybe that could be swapped for something else. I could see losing the Mon Mothma for, I don't know, like a Rebel Pathfinder or like almost any other 2-drop, but try and get in here. I don't know if there's too much to add about these turn 1 plays. You've seen it before a million times. So let's move on to the 3 cost cards. Again, fairly standard for a green Sabine deck. We've got the 3 Fleet Lieutenants, 3 Wing Leaders, we've got the 3 Red 3s, we got 2 Fighters for Freedom, and we got an Akbar. And yeah, I don't know if there's too much to add here. Akbar can be really good into certain decks, and especially off of Ewing Reinforcement to blow something up. But the main 3-drop that is the most interesting card, which I sort of already mentioned at the beginning, is Resupply. That is the card that I'm most excited to play on turn 2 because it lets you bring Sabine out right away. She can help you contest the board early in the game. You're using her generally in this deck to trade with your opponent's stuff, not to go super aggro. A lot of decks feel like when you play Resupply, you're giving up your entire turn to do that. In this deck, you're not doing that at all. You're actually able to then flip your leader and start contesting the board with your leader while you're ramping at the same time. So it's very fun, very cool. And yeah, let's move on to talk about the forecast cards. We've got Bright Hope, we've got K2. Pretty standard. Not all Green Sabine decks are playing 3 Bright Hope, but in a more late game deck like this, I think it makes a lot of sense. And K2 is K2. K2 is really great. I think a lot of the time in this deck, you actually want to do the discard with K2, not do the 3 damage. But sometimes against certain decks, you just can be a normal Green Sabine aggro deck, depending on your draw. So that is always an option that is available. Next up, we've got the 5-cost cards. I've split 2 and 2 between Steadfast Battalion and Zeb. I think Zeb is uniquely good in this version of Sabine because you can play your 5-cost cards on turn 3, and Zeb can take out 2 units that your opponent may have played in the meantime while you've been resupplying and doing stuff. Steadfast is probably not going to be used to its maximum potential on turn 3, but you could potentially save the ECL if Sabine lives for turn 4 when your opponent flips. Maybe if you're against Boba, you're both flipping on it, or you flip your Sabine a turn earlier than they flip their Boba, and you still have your Sabine out. They flip their Boba, you can Steadfast into it if they ramped also. It's probably not going to happen. They're probably killing your Sabine before they flip Boba, but sometimes that it works out. So I like the split and having the option either way. So those are the 5 drops. Let's talk about the 7-cost cards. We've got Mace Windu, we got Ewing Reinforcement. Mace Windu is in here because that is kind of the point of the deck, was trying to make Mace Windu good in a deck. And he is okay. He's not too bad. I think if you can play him early enough in the game, it feels like he's pretty impactful. Pulling him off of Ewing Reinforcement can be really good in certain situations, and just Ewing Reinforcement being a card that can pull you whatever you need in whatever situation you're in, I think makes Mace Windu more interesting in a deck, because you can kind of ignore it unless you need it, and then you don't have to actually draw it. You can just draw it off of Ewing. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it ends up working out a lot of the time. And yeah, I mean, Mace Windu is powerful when he works, but doesn't always work. And then we've got Home 1, we got Reinforcement Walker. Both are great cards that offer quite a bit of card advantage as well as just power to the board. So Home 1, we talked about it in the Leia deck, but yeah, great card. Reinforcement Walker, I love Reinforcement Walker. This might be top 3 favorite cards in the entire set. It's so good. It can help you heal and stabilize. It can help you draw cards against control. And yeah, it's just really, really great. So I think the only other card that we didn't talk about in the deck already is Open Fire, but being a more late game control-y Sabine deck, just wanted a little bit more removal. And Open Fire is a pretty good option there. Talking about the sideboard a little bit here, we've got 3 disabled Fang Fighters just to fight back against some of the upgrades out there, lightsabers, entrenched, stuff like that. We've got 2 Traitorous. This is another thing that you can do on turn 3 if you've ramped and your opponent's probably not expecting you to have Traitorous in a Sabine deck. So you can bring this in against your Boba opponent or your Chirrut opponent if they are going to try to put a lightsaber on their Yoda or something like that. You can steal it. It's pretty fun. We've got a 3rd copy of Zeb, which I think is the better of the 5-cost units against aggro, where you might want a little bit of help. And Zeb can, obviously help you take out a couple units. We got Forced Surrender in there, which is great against control. Sabine, with her ability to ping, can turn on Forced Surrender right away. So, first action you ping with Sabine. Next action you can just discard 2 from your opponent's hand while you draw 2. So against control, that's massive, and she makes a really good use of that card. Then lastly, we've just got the extra copies of Home 1 Reinforcement Walker. I think against control, you're probably bringing in the Forced Surrenders and the Home 1 and the Reinforcement Walker. Maybe Fang Fighters if they're a deck that plays Entrenched, maybe not. And then against aggro, probably, bringing in the Traitorous, bringing in the Zeb. I think this deck is okay into aggro already with the ECL with Zeb and the Open Fire and, Sabine coming out on turn 2, stuff like that. And yeah, so this is Ramp Sabine. I think it's a really fun deck. I think you can catch tons of people off guard. I think that nobody is going to be expecting you to do this, at least not in game 1, and you're going to have a lot of fun surprising people with this. So if you play it, let me know what you think about it. If you make any changes, let me know what those are. And yeah, let's move on to deck number 3. All right, so the 3rd deck that I want to talk about is this Cassian deck. So I've been playing this for a while as well. This is sort of a hand hate version of Cassian. The goal is basically Cassian lets you draw so many cards that the sort of 1-for-1s that use one of your cards to discard one of their cards become better, or at least like are overcome by the fact that he's drawing you cards. So now you're actually gaining a bunch of cards while your opponent is losing cards, and you can just attrition your opponents out with this deck, which is very fun to do and very mean against a lot of decks. So let's dive in. We've got, in the turn one plays sort of section, we've got Greedo. We got 3 of those. We got 3 Green Squadron A-Wing. We got 3 Sabines. We've got 2 Leias. We got 2 Lothal Insurgents. So quite a few turn one plays, and notably all of them except for Leia can hit for 3 and turn on Cassian's ability. So Leia is a card that I don't really love playing on turn 1, but if you need to, you can play it alongside Greedo or something like that. Ultimately, Leia's in there to exhaust your opponent's units that are big that you don't want to deal with at the moment. Usually you want to play like Greedo or A-Wing or Sabine on turn 1. Lothal Insurgent is interesting. It is another card that late game can sort of disrupt your opponent's hand. You know, obviously they draw a card to replace the card that you discard, but it's still disruptive and can be decent. It's for 3. I've had a lot of games where it feels like you want to play a 2-cost and then attack with it, and then draw a card off of Cassian and then play another 2-cost. So that's sort of where I like having a few more cheap options here. Not every matchup is a matchup where you want to do that, but against slower decks, more controlling decks, I think that's a pretty good route to take. Then we're going to talk about the 3-cost units here. We've got Ezra, we've got Millennium Falcon, both fantastic cards, both hit for 3. Ezra can help you get even more card advantage by playing cards off the top of your deck. Millennium Falcon is a little bit tricky to play in this deck because you are going to have to pay that extra resource every time. You're already wanting to pay extra resources to draw cards with Cassian. So I would say Falcon in this deck is a little bit more of a late game card, unless you need to contest your opponent's space arena in the earlier parts of the game, and then Millennium Falcon can be amazing. In the 4-cost unit slot, we've got K2, we've got Auzituck, Liberator Gunship, and then we got 1 Gamorrean Guard. So K2 needs no introduction, amazing card. Auzituck Liberator Gunship is a card that not a lot of people, I think, are playing, but I like it quite a bit. Number 1, it attacks for 3, so it turns on Cassian's ability. Number 2, it allows you to take out an opponent's A-Wing or an opponent's other unit that's a 3/3 or 2/3 and survive, threaten to take out something else. So I think it's just a versatile spaceship. There's not a lot of other options that you can do. I think for a while I was playing the Strafing Gunship in this deck, but I don't really like that card. Other people like that card. I'm not a huge fan. Yeah, I just like having the Ambush. Ambush is really nice. And then 5-drop units, we've got 2 Chewbacca and 2 Syndicate Lackeys. I think you could go either way on this. You could do more Chewbacca if you're running into more aggro. You could do more Syndicate Lackeys if you feel like that's a better card. But both are there to have an immediate impact on the board in one way or the other. They both have enough attack to turn on Cassian's ability. They both can sort of help protect Cassian. Chewbacca has Sentinel himself. Syndicate Lackeys can take out a problematic unit before the next turn when you flip Cassian. And yeah, can just be pretty useful. The last units we're going to talk about, we've got Mace Windu, we've got Han Solo. So we got 1 Mace Windu. I had more in there previously. This was another attempt originally at putting Mace in a deck, and he's okay, but Han is so good. Han allows you to, remove whatever your opponent has on their side of the board that it can hit that you need to, and it's just really strong. Sticks around as a 6/6. Your opponent has to deal with it, or else you threaten to he threatens to just kill every single one of their ground units and can be a menace. So let's talk about the spice in the deck. So we've got 2 Force Throws, 3 Spark of Rebellion, 3 Cunning. We've got 2 Force Surrender. So this is the sort of discard package here. Force Throw is mostly just used to discard a card from your opponent's hand. Sometimes you don't have time to do that and this gets resourced. Sometimes you get really lucky and you can pair this with Ezra or Mace Windu to actually throw something. But this is mainly in there just to get that 1-for-1. You're discarding a card, your opponent's discarding a card, but you've drawn cards, so you're still ahead sort of vibe, and it's pretty cheap. You can do it for 1, obviously, so definitely nice. Spark of Rebellion, insane card. I don't think I need to tell you about how good this card is, but definitely one of the better cards in this deck. We've got Cunning. So 3 Cunnings. We're playing this for 6. Discarding a random card from your opponent's hand is pretty good. Its other modes are also fantastic. I've won so many games with this deck just off of Cunning alone. You get to deal with 3 of their units on a turn and then use that tempo to clean up the board. You can bring Cassian out on that same turn. Cassian's got Saboteur, so it can get through Sentinels and stuff and help clean up the board, or go face and draw a card, which is great. And then lastly, we've got Force Surrender, which draw 2 cards, your opponent discards 2. You have to have dealt damage, but again, this is on the same turn where you're bringing out Cassian, who's a Saboteur. You also have a ton of other units in the deck that are going to help you deal damage to your opponent's base. And then, yeah, I think the only other cards that we haven't talked about are Open Fire and Waylay. You just sometimes need ways to deal with your opponent's units. I think that's one of the downsides of this deck, is that it can feel like your opponent can outrace you with this deck. So you like really need to make sure that you are controlling their board. And it can be hard to control their board while you're trying to control their hand. A lot of times that just doesn't work out, and you need to just focus on board control. So those cards are there to help. And yeah, let's talk about the sideboard. So we've got an extra force throw. We've got 3 shoot first. Shoot first, great into aggro decks. I think that single-handedly makes us so much better in aggro than it would be otherwise. We've got 2 Fang Fighters to deal with the upgrades. We've got an extra Gamorrean Guard and an extra Chewbacca, both mostly in there to fight aggro and to have some more Sentinels. We've got the extra copy of Force Surrender, and then 1 Change of Heart. So against control, I'm bringing in the Force Throw, I'm bringing in the Force Surrender, the Change of Heart, maybe the Fang Fighters, and then against aggro, I'm bringing in the Shoot First, the Gamorrean Guards, the Chewbacca, maybe the Fang Fighter, depending. This deck is incredibly fun to play, can be incredibly mean, feels oppressive when it pops off and actually does the thing that it wants to do. It doesn't always do that. It can struggle a lot against decks that put a lot of pressure on you, but I definitely think you guys should try this one. I think that this deck and this concept has the biggest potential to get better in the next set, because I mean, just of cards that we've seen so far, Poe I think fits amazingly well in this deck. Probably swap like the Syndicate Lackeys for Poe as a 6/6 that can also discard cards from your opponent's hand and or do a bunch of other things that are awesome. If you play Poe in this deck, maybe you also play Black One, but I don't think you really need it. Cassian draws you so many cards, it's crazy. Like, one of the things that I love about this deck that I think it can do uniquely well is that it draws so many cards that you can just continually resource for the entire game and not worry about like holding cards back in your hand. I've ended games on like 15 resources when my opponent had to stop at like 8. And it just allows you to play multiple cards in a turn and start like really putting on the pressure and playing into that attrition game plan. So yeah, huge fan of this deck. It's a lot of fun. I'm excited to see where this could potentially go in the next set. Cure is another card that I think is really cool in this deck in the next set. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you play this deck, let me know what changes you might make. And yeah, hope you have fun. Hope you guys enjoy playing with all 3 of these decks. Hopefully you give them a try. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and that's it. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.